This video is for anyone about to go into a GCSE exam where you have to get an unseen poem and you have to analyse it and talk about it. I'm a poet. That's what I do all the time. I've written like 6 collections of poetry, and I still sometimes get a poem and I look at it and I think I have absolutely no fucking idea what the poem is about. And it happened to me just now, and I thought, there's some teenagers that are about to go into an exam where the clock is ticking on the wall and they're given a poem and they think, I don't know what the poem's about. So if that's you, try not to panic. Poetry is your friend. It's really not as scary as you think it is. And even if you don't understand what the poem's about, you can use that in the answer. You can talk about how the poem is maybe surreal, how it's maybe dreamlike, how it's complicated to understand on first reading, how it's the sort of poem that you assume people need to read again and again to find new meanings of. It's complicated. Yeah, you can use all of these words. You know, don't write in your exam, I don't have a fucking clue what this poem's about, but you can talk about the author's intention. Maybe the author meant for it to be a complicated poem. Maybe they meant for the reader to have to reread it lots and lots of times, that you're really picking it apart. Maybe that's why it's written rather than spoken, because you can hold the book and read it again and again. So I was I'm currently editing on the final edits of my most recent poetry collection, and I thought I would pick up some poems and I'll read them, because it like motivates me to edit my own poems, get better at writing. And I normally read poets who I think are more skilled at certain things, and at the moment I'm trying to work on my metaphors because I use cliches a lot, and I'm trying to make them a little bit more specific, a little bit more individual to me, a little bit more interesting. And so I picked up Sylvia Plath because I think she's brilliant at that, another poet. And I read this short poem. I often pick the short poems. Remember, you can talk about the length of the poem, even if you don't understand a fucking word of what it's about. You can talk about the length, if it's a quite short poem, if it's punchy, if there's a point to it being short, the way it looks on the page, because it's a short poem. I picked this one. It's called The Hanging Man, and I read it. I'm going to read it to you. The Hanging Man. By the roots of my hair, some god got hold of me. I sizzled in his blue vaults like a desert prophet. The night snapped out of sight like a lizard's eyelid, a world of bald white days in a shadeless socket. A vulturous boredom pinned me in this tree. If he were I, he would do what I did. So I'm sitting there as someone that has been learning about poetry my whole life. And I honestly thought I'm reading that. I have no idea. I have no idea what it's about. And I was thinking, oh my God, there's teenagers that are about to go into an exam, and they might have that. They might be sitting like me, but you're younger, with many less years of experience in English, having not written a poem maybe in your life, having not written 7 fucking poetry collections, and I still do not understand this poem when I look at it. So if I were in an exam, I just want you to look at the poem and stay calm, because a poem is not your enemy. It's just a certain type of writing, and I love writing them, and I would hate someone to see my poem and panic. It's not what life's about. So if I look at this, I've only read it once. I'll read it again, maybe read it a 3rd time, depending on how much the clock is ticking. And there are certain things that you can look at and you can talk about even if you do not understand what the poem is about. So go for the stanzas. So the stanzas are like the paragraphs in the poem. This stanza is in 2-line stanzas. You can talk about it. This poem is in 5-line stanzas. Calm. Don't need to know about the poem. Look at the 2-line stanzas. Talk about why maybe the author put them in 2-line stanzas. It's about the way that it's laid out on the page. Does it match something in the poem? Like, okay, so for example, by the roots of my hair. So there's a woman in the poem and there's some god holding her. So there's 2 sort of people, 2 characters in the poem. So maybe the 2 lines mimic these 2 voices in the poem. Maybe they don't. We don't know. This poet is not alive anymore. And even poets that are alive like me, you can get stuff from our poems that we maybe didn't intend. Okay, author's intentions, always talk about them in your GCSE. There's a really good quote about it by a poet called Imtiaz Darka, and I heard her talk the other day, and she said that once she's written the poem and then she's, you know, given it to a reader, the reader casts their own shadow on the poem. Seriously, write that in your exam. Like, it's almost impossible to know the author's intentions of any piece of writing. But in Imtiaz Darka's words, once the poet has given the poem to a reader, the reader can cast their own shadow on the poem. So cast your own shadow on the poem. Just make stuff up. No one's going to phone. If it's my poem in your exam, no one's going to be phoning me up being like, oh, Holly, somebody said that the alliteration in the third line of this poem is trying to mimic the footsteps of the character. Is it right? All right. No, you didn't think that. Right. So we'll give them a fail. No one's going to phone up the author. Just put your own thoughts into this poem. Talk about language technique. Like, learn the language techniques. You know, assonance, alliteration, metaphor, simile, but there's also repetition. There's stanza length, the title. Like, nearly every poem that you'll get unseen has a title. Have a look at the title. Like, stay calm. Stay calm. This title is called The Hanging Man. Immediately there's assonance. Just find the assonance, find the alliteration, and jigsaw together what impression it might make. Like, make it up. Make it up. Just talk about the language and talk about the author's intentions. If you don't really know the theme of the poem, like this poem, I'm not sure what it's about, but there are a lot of different images, vivid images. There's a line, the night snapped out of sight like a lizard's eyelid. Now that really baffled me, but just put that in your thing. This line is quite surreal. It may be complicated to certain readers. Perhaps the author intended to make us view the night in this way on purpose, to put us into a sort of dreamlike state. Like, if something's complicated and surreal, like use that. You don't have to explain exactly what this poem is about, and probably Sylvia Plath, the writer, might not be able to explain exactly what the poem's about. The title, The Hanging Man, there's assonance. You sort of forget about the word the because there's assonance, making the hanging man really sound like rhythmically it goes together. It immediately begins the poem. In what way? Like the hanging man, it's immediately a sort of, what can you say if you're sitting an exam, a quite negative, maybe horrific, maybe a frightening start to the poem. Right, look at the first line and look at the last line. Right, try to find repetition, try to find rhyme. The first line, by the roots of my hair some god got hold of me. Right, I don't really know exactly what the poem's about, but I can see that image. Like, the image is very vivid. If you read a line and you can see it in your head, then the image is very vivid. The author intended for this image to be very vivid, almost cinematic maybe, so that the reader can really see the poem in their head, or the reader can really picture what is going on in the poem. By the roots of my hair. Okay, so by the roots, immediately it's very specific. Everything's specific in poetry, man. Every metaphor and simile is specific, because poets, we spend our entire lives trying to create specific images so they have our like stamp on them. There's so many specific, it's very individual. It's very very thoughtful, very thoughtful. By the roots of my hair, so we're immediately zoomed in very closely onto a specific part of this person's body. They don't want us to be looking at them in general. They want us to specifically be like right in the roots of their hair. Some god got hold of me. Like, just if you see a repetition of like vowels, it's probably assonance. Some god got hold. So this some god got hold. Look for monosyllabic words, words with one syllable. Some god got hold, very rhythmical. You can feel the god getting hold of her. Just think of your language techniques and pick them in the poem. Put them into the poem like a jigsaw. You don't have to look at the poem and understand what the poem's about. Just go through it. Title, first line, the length of the poem, the length of the stanzas, 4 different language techniques. Talk about it. Vivid images, specific similes. It's possibly intentionally confusing.